We've got an all-star panel to talk about this reimagining capitalism. Hans Vestberg, NISO Introduction CEO of Verizon. Alison Omens, Chief Strategy Officer, Just Capital, also for, in a previous life at the White House, helped direct the U.S. policy in terms of inclusive capitalism. We have Paul Tudor Jones, Tudor Investments, also the founder of Just Capital. Now, Paul, this is your Davos debut here, and you're going head-to-head against Donald Trump. So I thought you were the master of market timing, by the way, so and maybe it's matter programming. But why don't you introduce the concept of the Just 100 and Just Capital? We'll start with that.
So, Just Capital was started about 7 years ago with the idea that corporations could use their financial weight and investors could use their capital in a way that promotes social good. And it's been a really interesting discovery along the way, because along the way, we've learned that capitalism in its current form is probably not working for most of working people, not just in America, but throughout the world. And it's a very timely subject, and it's the reason why stakeholder capitalism is, I think, the central theme of Davos this year.
Obviously, it's something everyone's talking about. Hans, Verizon number 19 on the Just 100. How is it now? So you're managing in a stakeholder economy. How has that shift? You as a CEO, how have you had to shift how you run a company?
I had the fortune or unfortunate to be CEO for many years in my previous job and this job, and I think that it has changed. I think the employees are asking much more of you to be a visible CEO. Secondly, you also have a lot of people around you, stakeholders like customers, that really care about this. But ultimately, I think that I've been on a journey since the Millennium Development Goals to see that I stitch together our strategy with the overall goal for our society. And that we have continued now with in Verizon. I think that it really excites your employees, definitely your customers, that you're standing up for the right things. And ultimately, shareholders are seeing the impacts of it. And I think that such a large company that I'm running, I have a huge responsibility for not only thinking about one stakeholder, which is the shareholder, which is important. I have several, and I actually need to take care of all of them. And I think that it has evolved. I came here the first time in Davos 10 years ago. I felt very alone, speaking about how mobility and mobile broadband will make inclusion in Africa. Nobody was speaking about it. Today, I have to say, I'm excited to see so many enterprises actually start taking actions, part of the strategy, because it has to be part of the strategy. So enormous evolution in 10 years, if I just think back the first time I was here, and I think it's good. Are we doing enough? Probably not, but at least I see a lot of cooperation doing the right things nowadays.
So the first step in trying to improve behavior is measurement. Alison, can you tell us what some of the drivers are for the Just 100 and for measuring corporate citizenship?
Sure. So Just Capital extensively polls the American public on what they think is most important for companies to prioritize. So we've been doing that work for 5 years now, and consistently the most important thing people say is how you treat your workers. Pay, benefits, non-discrimination, followed by customer treatment, by ethical leadership, environmental impact, obviously. But the important thing, I think, in this context is that what people are saying, everyday people, is that what's important for companies to be thinking about is all of their stakeholders. And so obviously that's why it's so relevant for us to be here today, that Just Capital is really actually assessing how publicly traded companies are doing across stakeholder groups, with the most important thing, again, being on how you treat your workers, obviously in the context of this raging debate around inequality. That's a really important context.
Now, Paul, back to you. Now, you made your bones in the 80s, a true student of Milton Friedman. So what happened to Friedmanism?
The reason why we have the big divisiveness we have, the populist movements we have, is the sharing arrangement in society's changed since 1970. So in 1970, profit margins used to be 6% of corporate revenue. Today, profit margins are 11 or 12% of corporate revenue. So if you just think about it, there are $2 trillion of profits in the United States last year. 50 years ago, a trillion of that 2 trillion would have gone to the other stakeholders, employees, customers, communities, and the planet. Today, again, the difference between 6 and 12%, that trillion goes to shareholders. So the sharing has changed, and the consequence of that, we're seeing play out in the political arena, where you've got 2 of the 3 candidates promoting socialism. So that's why we're seeing government responding to a difference in the way that the productive output of society is being shared, and that's why capitalism's going to change one way or the other. Maybe capitalism won't change, but certainly we have 2 ways of doing it. We can either do it top down and let government redistribute income, or we can do it bottom up and come with a different sharing arrangement. To me, the most productive and efficient way is to do it bottoms up with a different sharing arrangement. So somehow, shareholders, we need to probably mean revert to where we were for most of the 20th century, as opposed to where we are now, where the vast majority of those profits really go to the top 1% to 5%.
Well, it's interesting, and full disclosure, on the board of Just Capital, it's the biggest driver when you survey, because the Just 100 is built on what Americans want from their corporations. It's not a bunch of people sitting on a stage dictating it. Like you said, it's bottom up. It's listening to the American people. What the American people say, and I think it must be true for around the world, is that how you treat workers is actually the biggest driver. How you treat workers, even more than your shareholders, even more than your customers. It's how you treat the people who work for you. Hans, how, understanding that, what have you done at Verizon, and what can we learn about how you treat your employees to keep your employees happy? Because that seems to be the biggest driver in terms of whether people are happy with the system.
First of all, I agree with what you said before. I mean, your employees is an asset. You invest in the employees when they come into the company. You need to see that they remain both loyal and excited of working for the company. I think the things we have done, first of all, we launched a new purpose. I want every employee to feel that they're part of where we're going as a company. Secondly, we decided already last year to start giving out shares to all our employees. We want them to be part of the company. Then we decided also to start education all our employees on our philosophies on how to run the company, how to treat each other. Because ultimately, you come to a workplace, you want to be recognized, you want to be feel free to do whatever you want and be whoever you are. Those type of things is not coming easily in a company with 140,000 employees. So this year we're going to train another 140,000 employees. They will all get training. Secondly, we are in a world where you need constantly education. You come out from university or high school, and that's just a fresh sort of competence. 10 years later, you need something new. And companies like ours need to take much more responsibility. So nowadays, we do much more self-education with our own system. So each and every employee can see a path, how they can educate themselves, take responsibility. But ultimately, it is a bottoms up and a top down constantly. We do a quarterly survey right now on all our employees, because annual or biannual sort of test how the organization feels is too far away between them, because it's happening so much. So now we have 10 questions every quarter instead, to see that we have the pulse of the organization. Do they feel that the leadership is doing the responsible actions, and are the employees taking those responsible actions? So we have done tremendous a lot the last 18 months, but again, this is a never-ending journey. You need constantly connect with your employees, because ultimately that's the biggest asset you have.
What a lot of employees are saying, I'm sure Verizon certainly, and it's true whether you're looking at access to capital markets, access to jobs, is a level playing field. Inclusivity, obviously, vitally important now. Allison, you helped set inclusivity policy for the U.S. before joining Just Capital. What are you seeing in terms of what Just companies are doing to make themselves more inclusive, and what can we take away from that?
Sure. It's very interesting, this conversation around inclusivity, because there's so much movement in it right now. For example, a couple years ago, I actually worked on the White House Equal Pay Pledge, which was transparency around had companies conducted an equal pay policy. And that was hard to even have the conversation 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Now we're seeing tremendous trends in terms of companies assessing pay between men and women, people of color, and disclosing it. Increasingly in the 20s sort of percentile of companies have disclosed that they've done an equal pay policy, and that's 4 years. Similarly, I think at Just Capital, we're tracking things like, has a company disclosed their diversity and inclusion targets? In addition to policies. So we see a lot of companies having disclosed policies, but until you're really disclosing those targets, it's a lot harder to assess where companies actually are on that journey. So a lot of our job at Just Capital is to say, the first step is transparency on issues like this, companies talking about it. And then the next step is actually assessment and being held accountable and looking at not just policies, but performance on diversity and inclusion, performance on living wages, which isn't something we've talked about, but I know Paul is, all of us are very focused on, sort of performance on how companies are living up to sort of the cultural announcements and expectations around creating a diverse and inclusive work environment.
And Hans, what are you guys seeing in that area, specifically in D&I?
No, I think that first of all, I think that D&I starts from the top. I think that guys like me need to show that we really think that's good for business. That means that you think about the diversity when you put together teams. And I usually said that the worst thing you can do is to put together a team with 10 Hans Vespers. That outcome will be horrendously bad. You need people with diverse backgrounds, all types. And I have done that. I had the great chance when I came in to actually take a good look at the top 100 of the company. And basically our diversity index just went through the roof when we looked through it. And of course, if I showed that to my leadership team and their leadership team, I believe strongly that they're going to understand this is something that is really good for business. And we see it now pervading going down. Now we need to work from bottom up. So we get the right type of recruitment, diverse recruitment, and taking away all biases that there is. When there is biases all the time. And that's why we have unbiased training for all the leaders. We have roughly 12,000 leaders in our company. Everybody has to go through unbiased training. You need to start with the fundamentals before you scream. So you start with leading by example, and then you start training them. I'm certain that we're going to see such a difference in the whole company over time. We see it now in the top 100 immediately. I usually say, if you take the leadership team of Verizon today, it's all nationalities basically. Even we feel it's an all-American company. It's males, it's females, it's Afro-American, it's Latinos, it's Swedes. It's basically everything right now. So I hope that leading by example and being responsible is the way doing it, and then training.
Well, you bring up an excellent point, and Paul, this goes to you, where historically it's been seen, doing the right thing has been seen as something that's somewhat of a tax. You might do the right thing, but it's not necessarily good for the bottom line. But Paul, you're trying to quantify and arguing and have argued that it's actually good for the bottom line. You want to maybe elaborate on that?
Well, if you look at our rankings, we rank the 1,000 largest companies in the United States. The top 100, according to the American people's concept of justness, actually, they perform so much better. They create jobs at a 20% faster rate. They give to communities 8 times a faster rate. They are much more likely to be environmentally sustainable. They hardly ever get fined. But most importantly, they have a 6% higher return on equity on average than the other 900. And their share price on average does much better than the other 900. So I think, Bob, if you listen to what the public says, and by being resonant with them, the pie actually grows for you and grows actually for society. If I think back in the 60s, when we had a different sharing arrangement, when profit margins were half what they were today, GDP was actually twice the level for the decade of the 60s than it has been for the trailing 10 years. So the idea that by focusing on shareholders, we're going to create greater societal wealth The statistics don't bear that out.
Well, any business needs customers, and your customers have to be able to afford to buy.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes,
I think
please.
it's so important what the giving measurement to all this. I think that at least me as a leader, I believe in this, and I think it's absolutely right that what you're saying. But in order to convince all the stakeholders that is really you're doing better by doing this, that's the type of metrics you're using. Then there are different metrics as we all know that. But in general, measuring this and proving it is going to be even better. I'm convinced anyhow, but I think for the broader public and for all the constituencies, what you're doing, I think is so important. Just so having that said.
How do we see this playing out internationally? You're measuring American companies. You know, Hans, you're running an American company, but you're from Europe.
I'm European.
Yes, you're European, running an American company. How much can this translate, and how fast will this translate to being able to measure around the world, and how important is that?
I hope one day there's a just capital in every country, because you've got big cultural differences country by country, but I think the most important thing is for companies to be in step with what the citizens of that country believe is important to them. And that's really all Just Capital is doing, is providing a voice and amplifying what the public wants to see in their companies.
But on the other hand, you can also say that, being able to work in both the worlds, the US and the European, historically, the European has been much more inclusive in their work in society and much more drive from the society about being responsible leaders. I think that US is now catching up, and I think that's really important, because the US economy and the US market cap is probably 40-50% of the world. We need the US to step up in this, and I see so many great leaders in the US doing that right now, so I think it's good.
Who, maybe is a question for each of you, and we only have a couple more minutes. Which company is a role model for you in terms of what you do and what we can aspire to? Alison, and any of you, Alison, in terms of when you look at the Just 100, what company jumps out?
Well, I'd have to say Verizon. Verizon's done some really amazing things on workforce training and others this year that are the
Always
last
easy to have
couple
somebody
years.
else brag on you.
Well, Microsoft's our number one company. They announced last week that they were going carbon negative. They've done things like expect their suppliers to be providing paid parental leave, which is a really big deal. Obviously, when we talk about direct employees, Dan Schulman of PayPal did a financial distress test of his workforce last year, and has been talking a lot about the financial distress associated with employees and what that means for individuals who can't bring their full selves to work at call centers, et cetera, because they're so stressed about their finances. So moves like that, I think, are really significant and sort of show our future, that there's so much talk about stakeholder capitalism, but we really need to start seeing those actions associated with them. And it's different by company. Every company obviously has its own business model, but really we're excited to see those stories associated with it. And that's really what we're tracking in the Just 100.
Maybe exit question, maybe Paul, I'll throw it to you, because we talk about companies like Verizon that are doing great things. We talk about companies like Microsoft that are doing great things. But these are companies that are also doing very well. They're in fields that are doing well. So kind of cause effect. Is it that companies that are doing well can afford to do this, or is that companies who do well, thus have the results proven? Maybe you could talk about the ETF too. But
Well, it's interesting because we also rank companies within their sector. And it's funny because the ones that, again, if you look at what the American public says defines corporate justice, the ones at the top of their sector are also generally the most profitable. The one thing, if I had to pick one metric that a CEO needs to focus on, what are you doing for your employees? What are you paying them? How are you treating them? Are you putting them, if I had to think of all the stakeholders, the planet, the communities, customers, shareholders, employees, the American public, the number 1, 3, 4, and 6 of our 29 subcomponents all have to do with employees. And I think if we went back to putting employees first in the corporate situation, I think we'd reduce income inequality. I think we'd have a more socially cohesive society and a much happier place.
In my case, I have the luxury to work with all these brands you talk about. I mean, of course, working with Satya, Dan Schulman is on our board, working with all the big banks that are doing a lot, Brimo and Bank of America, Mark at Salesforce. The good thing for me is I can take the best from all of them, and that's how we should lead. I mean, you take what they have done great, maybe we should push it as well. Maybe they listen to us sometimes, and then we do it together. So it's not one company, that is the real company I want to be like. It's different pieces from all these leaders taking this action, and that's how we need to have our system to actually being more than 1 + 1 being 2. It should be 3 because we're multiplying it, and that's why I see my people that I admire.